Good morning. My name is Bruce Morrison, and I'm with Fisheries and Oceans Canada, the Sea Lamprey Control Program, and I work with all of these partners you see on this slide. I'm going to talk to you about sea lamprey in Lake Ontario, and particularly about what we did last year to control them. Prior to control, sea lampreys contributed to the loss of all of Lake Ontario's cold water fish, particularly lake trout. Across the Great Lakes, they wreaked havoc. So in 1954, a convention was created between the countries that established the commission, Great Lakes Fishery Commission, and our programs. And in Canada, Fisheries and Oceans is the agent to deliver the program, and USA is U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. On Lake Ontario, we've been delivering a fairly routine or constant program since 1971. It's based mostly on using Lampricide, but we also have barriers, and they have been in there since the 70s also. I think the program's been keeping lampreys under control since about 2009, and I'm going to show you a bit about that. The graph up at the top right is a picture of lake trout harvest on Lake Ontario's commercial fishery from 1900 to 1960. The units don't really matter because it's just really a trend I want you to see of the harvest going quickly up and then quickly down. So we think that the main drivers for this are fishing, sea lamprey, and pollution. So by 1950, lake trout were basically gone. Since that time, we tried to restore lake trout, and it didn't really work out too well. But in the 70s, we introduced the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, and in the late 70s, tertiary treatment of water, including eliminating point source phosphorus, and it helped improve water quality. And as you can see, lake trout, with our restoration efforts and control of sea lamprey, responded nicely. If you remember that, back to that life cycle picture, I said I was going to start off with the larval period of their life cycle. Larval Assessment looks at sea lamprey abundance in streams, the effectiveness of treatments, the recolonization or new colonization of tributaries. And last year we looked at about 58 streams, 17 for abundance, 23 for new detections, and we didn't get any. And that information we use to create next year's ranking list. Here's some pictures of assessment in action. There's Emma electrofishing on Covert Creek, which is on the North Shore, looking for larval sea lampreys. And on the right picture, you can see Emma, Trevor, and Wes keying out lampreys because they were just looked at the Bronte and the Credit, which have more than just sea lamprey in them. So with the information we get from assessment program and the ranking list, the sea lamprey control people send out treatment crews to take care of larval sea lamprey in the tributaries using Lampricide. Last year, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service office at Lake Champlain and New York State DEC delivered treatments for us in the Salmon River and Trout Brook, Grindstone Creek, and Little Sandy Creek because we weren't allowed to cross the border. And then our side, DFO took care of 8 tribs. I'll show you in a minute about those. Some other highlights where we had to take care of Graham Creek above the barrier and Shelter Valley above the barrier because both got flooded out in 2019-18. And we couldn't go there in 2020. Also, low water plagued us all over Ontario. So Duffins Creek's tribs had to be treated separately from the main later in the year because of low water levels in the summer. Here's some of the rivers we did do though. And as you can see, because of low water levels up in Lake Superior, we were able to come back to Lake Ontario in the summer, which is rare, and take care of all these tribs in the North Shore and New York State, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service did these. What I can tell you is normally we do these in April and May, sometimes into June. So they wouldn't have got done in 2021 if it hadn't been for low water up north. There's some pictures from this past year's work. Proof the Lake Champlain guys were down in New York. Here's a feeder site working in the shade. And we're lucky that they got there just in time, because look at the size of these things. They probably would have metamorphosed this year. Shelter Valley Creek was scheduled to be treated in 2020. And as I mentioned earlier, the barrier had been breached, not because of barrier construction, but because the lake was so high it inundated the barrier and lampreys went past it. But just to show you that kind of thing costs double, and you can see why. The barrier is right down by the mouth, below my head, and we had to go all the way up here above the 401 up into the hills to take care of that river. When we did get down to Shelter Valley Creek in September, it was full of salmon that were spawning. So we decided to leave, and we were lucky enough to be able to come back in October, and we got a good treatment in. As you can see in this picture though, the lampreys were huge. And you see some silver ones? Those are all parasitics that we got to before they got out into the lake. And I have to thank Chris Spatowski for taking these pictures for me. In 2022, we're going to do all of these treatments. This year, though, we can start in April, work through May, work into June on all of this. The Black River will come back and do in August. One thing that has been constant over time, especially even during COVID, was we operated all of our barriers on Lake Ontario in the last 2 years. New York took care of Orwell Brook for us 2 years in a row. This year we're heading down there right now to go do it. So we should be good to go. On the U.S. side, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is going to look at 80 barriers to see if they're where they are and if they work and what they are. So make sure the database is accurate. Adult assessment takes a look at migrating, spawning sea lamprey that come into streams on Lake Ontario. And we use 5 tributaries to give us our index. It's the Humber, Duffins, and Bowmanville, Black, and Sterling. And we do index the others, Coburg and Orwell, but we don't use them for our estimate. Some of the information we have comes from marking rates on lake trout. That's an index on all of the Great Lakes. On Lake Ontario, the target is 2 in 100 lake trout greater than 432 millimeters or 17 inches long. As you can see in 2020, we are just above target. I don't have the 2021 data yet. Using the information from the 5 traps I talked about, we can estimate population size of adult sea lampreys in Lake Ontario. In 2021, the population was around just over 5,000, and the target, as you can see on this graph by the black line, is 14,000, so we're well below target. Our assessment team does some other work with partners like Dr. Adal, who are looking at methods to use eDNA to help us improve our assessment of streams, identify different lamprey species in the streams. And in this picture, you can see Emma, the Wizard of Osmos, sampling water on one of the 3 streams you can see in the list. I'd like to thank everyone who's here today. I'd also like to thank all the jurisdictions and landowners who make our work possible. Without them, we can't get onto the river. I'd like to thank the Commission and their staff for organizing this event and others, and for coordinating us throughout the year. I'd really like to thank all the teams, all the people who helped deliver the program out in the field to protect this wonderful resource. Keep on being champions for our program, everyone. There's Kevin sitting there on a little trivet scriba. I'm looking forward to the next outreach event where we can see kids like this looking in awe at the lamprey stuck to the glass. This is from up in Duluth, but every show I've worked, you see the same thing. Sometimes it's not so curious, but that kid on the right, he's got more than curiosity happening. Lastly, don't forget the annual meeting this year is at Niagara-on-the-Lake. It's in person. It's from May 31st to June 2nd. Information's at the GLFC website or clamprey.org. It's free to attend, and the venue's quite a nice one. I hope to see you there. Thanks.